Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system on a 2023 Ford Bronco. There's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required for flat towing a vehicle, and there may be a few extra things that you'll have to add, but the basics that you'll have to have legally are going to start with our base plate, and that's going to become the mounting point for all your components, and it attaches to the frame of the vehicle. So it's a structural mounting point that has arms here that allows you to get your tow bar connected to it. Your tow bar is the connecting point between the base plate on your towed vehicle and the hitch on the RV. Now, along with that, where our arms attach, we also have these safety chain loops. So just like a trailer, you have your safety cables, making sure that in case of a disconnect, it's going to keep everything attached. We also have diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light signals from the 7-pole on the RV to the taillights on your towed vehicle. And that's all via this umbilical. And it's also a good time to run a charge line, which is one of those components that's not required, but something you might want to add in. It'll trickle charge the battery on the towed vehicle as you're going down the road. We also have a supplemental braking system, which is going to slow and stop the vehicle as you apply the brakes going down the road. As far as braking systems, there's plenty of different ones available. Today we have an Air Force One because our coach has air brakes, but some other good ones are going to be your Stay and Play Duo for your standard hydraulic brakes, or even some of your portable systems are good. Blue Ox Patriot is one of my favorite. And this is also part of our braking system. Not only do we have our breakaway switch, but because of our air brakes, we also have our air cable. A braking system is going to be a legal requirement on most flat-towed vehicles, and the Bronco is definitely one that fits into that weight category that will need it. And also, depending on certain states, you're better to just have it. That way you can travel throughout the US and safely and legally. And the Air Force One is a really great system when it comes to having air brakes on your coach. It's the one that I would prefer or recommend to really anyone. It's just a very simple system that just works really well. Now, with this, that does mean that you will be doing some install not only on the towed vehicle, but also on the RV side, because you will be putting a tank in place, tying into your supplied and metered air, and basically making the connection so that you can transfer that air pressure from your RV to the towed vehicle. Now, many people look at portable systems as their go-to, which is fine if you plan on changing your vehicle out or if you really don't flat tow that often. But for people that are full-timers or you flat tow your vehicle a lot, it's really nice to be able to just plug in and go. And that's the best part about these fixed systems, is once they're in place, they are really easy to use every single time, and there's really no maintenance required. So we have our main unit mounted right here, and overall it doesn't really take away from the engine bay much. With some wire loom and everything tucked nicely, it keeps the engine bay looking really clean, and it just works every time. Even inside the vehicle, it's really hard to see the braking mechanism unless you're really looking for it. Our cylinder is mounted up on our brake pedal, and it's anchored to the firewall. So when we call for brake pressure, it's going to apply those brakes proportionally to the brakes that you're applying on your RV, bringing the vehicle to a slow or stop, or in case of a catastrophic disconnect, the breakaway switch will be pulled, applying the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop. Now, as far as the installation goes, this one is not too bad to do. The great part about this is there's very little electrical connections that you'll really have to make. A lot of it does come down to just getting air lines ran, but overall, this system on the vehicle side is really easy, and your cylinder that's mounted on the brake pedal already has a reed switch attached that acts as a brake light switch. So that's going to give you the indicator to your wireless coach link on the dash, or the 3 LED diodes that you would mount on your rear view mirror. Either way, super easy, one less component that you'll have to pick up. Now, as far as the RV installation, it's not too terribly bad. You are going to be under your RV. You are going to be cutting into some of the air lines on your RV, which can seem a little bit scary, but pretty much you're just tying in some push connect T-fittings, running your line back, and that's it. Now, if you're doing this installation on your own, I highly recommend having the instruction manual ready to go and follow along with our videos. I'm going to give you some of the tips to really just make sure it's the easiest installation that's going to work really well on your Bronco. So let's take a look at that. Now, when it comes to installing any braking system on a flat-towed vehicle, it can seem overwhelming. There's a lot of different aspects that we'll be plugging into, running through firewalls, but overall, none of it's terribly hard. It really comes down to just setting up everything in the place it's supposed to go and then making connections between the two. So planning it out is definitely going to help you out during the install. So on the vehicle side, we'll start we're going to be mounting up our breakaway switch, and on our base plate today, there's a tab that we're able to do that. Now, your base plate may not have a tab to mount it up, but either way, it's going to need to go on the front of the vehicle, and this is going to be one of the components that you hook up. This is going to be, just in case of a catastrophic disconnect, it's going to pull this cable, and that's going to apply the brakes on the towed vehicle. That way, it's not rolling down the highway. It'll bring it to a stop. Now, also on the front of the vehicle, since we're using air from the coach to actuate our brakes, we have our fitting. Now, there's going to be this smaller diameter one. There's a larger one that's going to go on the RV side, but this will also need to mount up somewhere where you can easily put the quick connect fitting on here every time you need to hook it up. So we'll be finding a nice solid mounting point. A lot of times I'll try to space it out. That way we don't have all of our cables on one side. So really anywhere where we can mount this up front is going to make it nice and solid. Now, the brains of the operation is going to be our main unit, and this is where a lot of our connection points are going to branch off from. Now, as far as electrical goes, this is actually one of the easier systems. You can see we just have 2 wires here, and I'll show you all those connections later. But we also have 3 air fittings, and we have air in, which is going to be that air that we have from that front connection fitting that's going to go eventually to the RV braking system, and that's where we get that air pressure. We also have a vacuum line, and this is going to be where it pulls air to balance that out and make sure that our brakes are being applied. Now, on our Bronco today, we have electric assisted brakes, so we're not going to really have to do a whole lot with this, which is really nice. And then we have air out. Now, this is going to eventually go through the firewall and attach to our cylinder, which is going to be really what actuates the brake. But all of it is controlled based off this. So as far as mounting up your main unit, the Air Force One has a pretty small footprint, which is nice, especially on engine bays that get a little bit cramped. So really anywhere that we can get this self-tapped in is going to be good in the engine bay. There's a few different options. You can use a fuse panel. You can mount it up kind of over here if you want. The main thing is you're still going to have access to all the things that you need to, but it's going to live safely in the engine bay. So I'll be getting this mounted up in here, and then all of that's going to pass through the grommet on the firewall, and that's going to make its way to our wireless coach link as well as our cylinder. Now, our cylinder is, again, how the brakes are applied, and this is going to mount up to the brake pedal. We'll see that we have that 1/4 inch push connect fitting where that air outline will feed into. And we have this anchor that's going to go on the firewall. And that way, when it's called to brake, it's going to have this cylinder extend out, bringing it closer to the firewall, which will slow and stop the vehicle as we apply the brakes. Now, we have a reed switch sensor, which basically just picks up on the magnet that it knows that it's being applied. So it's a great physical way to know that your brakes are actually working. And we have these wires that come off of that, which will eventually make their way to our wireless coach link. And this is a great option. There's 2 different ways to indicate that your brakes are being applied. Wireless coach link is my preferred method because that will send the signal from this box to the dash on the RV to the monitor light, and you'll know right away that the brakes are being applied or if they're dragging. The other option is going to be a 3 LED light, which will go in the rear view mirror of the vehicle, which is fine. It does do its job, but sometimes it's hard to see if you don't have rear view cameras or a camera that's good. Sometimes that glare on the windshield makes it really hard to see. So this keeps your eyes pretty much as a heads-up display. You can see right away that the brakes are being applied. Now, the Air Force One has the reed switch, which is really nice because this is how it indicates the brakes being applied. So you don't need to pick up a stoplight switch like you would on some of your other braking systems. This takes care of all of that. And once your wireless coach link is attached to all the wires, that's just going to get tucked underneath the dash. It can be in any position really, so that doesn't matter. But the main thing is you're planning out your attack as far as feeding wires through. Now, we will need to get a 12-volt power to this. So when running your airline through the firewall, I suggest running an extra length of wire. That way you can tap into that 12-volt power. So now that we have a game plan, go ahead, get all of your components at least mounted up and leave the wiring and the air connections till last. You can make the connections with all the airline tube and wiring pretty easily. So the main thing is making sure that you have those components in great spots. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you all the connections that need to be made, and then we can take a look at the RV side. Now I got our braking system installed, and something I want to show you is the connections that we make. You're going to want to make sure that long term your system's going to be working properly, and part of that is every electrical connection. You want to make sure that it's going to be secure, and since a lot of them live in the engine bay, using heat shrink butt connectors tends to be a really great way to make sure that it is going to be nice and strong. Now, what you're going to do with a heat shrink butt connector is very similar to a normal one, so I'll just show you a quick connection here. So we'll just strip back, and really this works for any butt connector. On most of these, maybe a 1/4 inch or so is kind of what you're looking for. And then these will crimp down just like a normal butt connector. But the problem with the normal butt connectors in those engine bays is it sure creates a pocket for any water or moisture to build up in there, and then long term that's just going to make those wires brittle, and potentially you may not have a great connection. Well, the heat shrink, once you put a heat gun to these, it'll actually start to singe around it, creating that nice watertight seal, and overall a very good connection. Now we have these here available at eTrailer, and throughout pretty much any of your flat tow component installs, if it's in the engine bay or outside of the vehicle to where it has the potential to get water, I would highly recommend picking some of these up. So as that cinches around, that'll make it nice and watertight. Now for 1/4 inch airline tube, you're also going to want to make sure that you're using a tubing cutter. And the problem is if you use just a normal pair of snips here, as you kind of press down, it's going to compress that, and that makes an oval shape or an almond shape that doesn't exactly sit in those push connect fittings very well, and that means that it has the potential to not only not lock on well, but also have air pass through. So we use this style of tubing cutter. It's basically just going to make sure that it's a nice square cut. So you can see there, it's squared up, perpendicular, and you really don't have to worry about that getting, damaged or bent in the process, and it generally makes it to where these bite onto those push connect fittings super easy. Your push connect fittings, when you press those in, you're going to want to push them in. You're going to get a little bit of tension pushing back, and then you'll feel it kind of pop in. Once that's the case, try to give it a tug. It shouldn't come out. But that's really going to be how it attaches to your fitting, your main unit, as well as your cylinder. So making sure that this is a nice solid connection is also going to be key. Now that we've taken a look at how to make the connections, I have everything mounted up, and I'll show you where everything runs. Now here I just have my coily cable on. Obviously just make sure you set this up to where you're going to have a nice easy way to get this popped in place. And the bracket on this, I painted it black to give it a nicer look, but I just used some self-tapping screws that go directly into the bumper. So if you need to, you can pull this panel off with just some plastic push pin removal and get that mounted up. And the 90-degree push connect fitting for the airline allowed me to kind of route this up. And so this just kind of runs at the top part of this bumper where I joined the wires that we had from our breakaway switch, which are just 2 of them. There's an orange and black. So as those kind of route over, I just kind of bundled those up, and then I was able to pass them up into our engine bay, and you'll be able to see that connection over here. So I used some wire loom just to kind of make this clean, but you can see that I have my 1/4 inch airline tube, the orange and black, and then this red wire is for our charge line. So if you're doing a charge line and tying that into your 6-pole, I recommend doing that at the same time because it's all headed to the same place, which it just routes up this way. And then I just simply pulled it up kind of in the front side of the battery here. Now let's take a look at those, the black and orange cable from the breakaway. I did extend these because they're a little bit short when it came time to tying it into the other wires, but pretty easy. The black is just simply going to go to one of the black wires off the main unit. So this one I kind of extended here, and eventually I'll have this all wire loom tucked nice and clean, but you can see that just connects to black. Black to black, super easy. Now once I got the violet and orange wire together, I also extended the wire here and then made my way over to our fuse holder, and then eventually I just put this on ring terminal, which will then go to 12-volt power. Now you'll see that we have another one. This is again from our charge line that we had, so I just routed those together. But I would recommend don't put your fuse in until you have all of your electrical connections made. You don't want power going through any of it, but this is kind of what I came up with. So with that connection made, really the only other electrical connection on the, not inside of the vehicle is going to be the other black wire from our main unit. and that is just going to go to the ground. And you have 3 factory grounds that you can pick from. In fact, there's quite a few grounds on here, which is really nice. But this one, just kind of put a ring terminal on there, got our ground in place, and that really does it for the electrical on this side. Now, I mentioned the air in. This is that one that goes to the front fitting. I curled that around, making sure not to have any kinks. So kind of tucking it in this fender gives it a nice, easy run. You don't have to really feed it through a whole lot. And then our air out, this goes to the cylinder. So just along with our violet or brown wire, this grommet, you can poke it through from the inside and remove it, which is really nice because you can drill a hole, and that's going to allow you to get that air line as well as that violet wire pass through. Now, as far as getting our main unit mounted up, I used the fuse panel cover to get this attached, and what I did was I notched a little portion of it out here and then bent the tabs on both sides, and then I used some double-sided tape that's really, really good and just kind of stuck this on here, and that allows us to, I didn't want to drill into this and cause any issue. It's a pretty tight fit, but this makes it nice and accessible if need be, and you can see obviously I can still get my access to my fuse panel, so this just snaps back in place when we need it, but it's going to live here. It's nice and solid. Now, the vacuum fitting here is just normally a barb fitting, but this is a electric assisted brakes, so we don't really need to tie into anything. We just simply take a small length of our black hose, and then on the end there's a cap that's going to be included in your kit, so just take that plug, put that in place, and that covers that. So now that we've pretty much touched on everything inside the engine bay, we'll head inside and I'll show you how that looks. Now, before I get all these wires tied up in the inside, I'll break it down on how this is all connected. So from our cylinder, which is mounted up on our pedal, we do have this black wire that goes to 2 bullet connectors. So we have a blue, and then this is that violet that they mentioned. Violet, pretty easy. This is that brown wire I ran in that eventually will tie into that orange wire and then to 12-volt power. So that's how we're getting our power into the reed switch. And when that's activated, it sends the signal to our coach link. And the coach link, as far as the connecting there, it's hard to see, but I have a red wire and a white wire. And the red wire is going to go to the blue, so I went ahead and connected that. The white wire is just a ground. And it's going to be hard to see, but right at this corner, there's a speaker grill that you can remove. There's a factory ground that's right here. That's an 8mm. So I put a ring terminal and attached my white wire to that ground there. And that covers the electrical here. Your wireless coach link is just a box that can be kind of mounted up anywhere up here. So I use this double-sided tape to attach that. Now, mounting the cylinder on this vehicle is actually quite a bit easier than a lot of the other ones. The brake pedal bracket is pretty thin, so that allowed me to tighten this up. And then the cable, I just used the self-tapping screws to put into the firewall there. There's a nice metal seam that I used as kind of reference. So if you kind of line it up there, you can self-tap that in. I checked the backside and it's nice and clear, so we don't have to worry about anything there. And as far as tension, you're going to want a little bit of play in the cable, and you're going to just tighten that down with there's a grub screw in that bracket, but you want just a little slack. That way it's not constantly pulling pressure on the brake pedal. You don't want to be dragging those brakes. And really what you're going to be looking for is when you apply the brakes, pull that cylinder back, and that's going to make sure that you have a straight shot. So as you pull that cable, it should pretty much become straight with the bracket. So it takes a little bit to get it lined up, but you can use this as reference for getting yours mounted up, and I think this is going to work out really well. Now, I also looped my airline up and then put that onto our quick connect fitting. So with everything tightened down there, we're good to go. Now, you really won't be able to check your brakes until you get the RV side done because we need that air pressure to actuate it, but you can test that your wireless coach link is working properly. So I plugged this into a cigarette lighter. I don't know if these cars actually have a standard cigarette style. I think there's just USBs, so you might need to use your RV. But either way, get that to a power source where it plugs in. You should see that light up. And then when you apply the brakes normally driving, that cylinder is going to move with it, so it's not going to go off. So what you'll need to do is push on the pedal, slide your cylinder back. That's going to get that reed switch to indicate it. If you hold it for about 5 seconds, you'll get that tone, which you can shut off if you want. There's a little toggle on the back. And that's basically to let you know that the brakes are dragging. But what you're looking for is when you press that, pull the cylinder back, we should get those to light up. and then it should go away when you allow that cylinder to rest. So with all of that taken care of, I'm going to go back with some wire loom and zip ties and just get everything nice and clean and tidy. I try to make it look as OEM as possible, but we're done on the vehicle side. So all we need to do is make sure that we're getting air pass through here on the RV side, which does involve cutting into your main line and getting the tank mounted. So I'll get this done, and then we'll get our RV pulled in, and I'll show you how to do that. Now for the RV side, you can definitely do this on the ground. Now, things that you're going to want to take in consideration, having that tubing cutter that I recommended earlier is going to make this a lot easier because you're going to be tying into your factory supplied air as well as metered air. And today we're doing this on a Freightliner chassis. We have a Renegade Verona. Yours may be very slightly different, just small variations, but overall it's going to be the same concept. So starting out here, we have our fitting. Now this is going to be the larger diameter one, so make sure you're getting the proper one, not the one on the towed vehicle side. And this, I found a factory screw going up in the fiberglass. I just ran another self-tapping screw up in there, and that makes a nice solid mount. Try to line it up with the side that it's on the vehicle. That way your cable's not having to cross over. And then from there, I just took our extra hose. Now it's very crucial that all that airline tube that you're really trying to make good pass, because you don't want to run out, and we are going to be making a few connections with it. So try to utilizing it in a nice, efficient path is going to be key here to make sure you have enough. So I just simply pushed our fitting in the push connect, and then we'll hop underneath and I'll show you my path back to where I mounted up the tank. So I just utilized some mounting spots. I used the frame or the hitch to zip tie it up. The main thing is you don't want this airline rubbing around or causing any chafing on it long term, and also make sure you don't kink the line. So just be careful when routing it. But I utilized a lot of the factory U-bolts as well as the holes through the cross members on the frame. Now we have this big underbody panel here, so I just routed that all the way forward. Pretty easy run here, and made my way up to where I decided to mount up our reservoir tank. So again, just kind of utilizing what's here. We want to make sure that the airline's not dragging, so just kind of routed this up over factory wires that were ran. And as far as the tank, I mounted this up. I'm right behind the rear differential. Cross member had holes in it already, and you can kind of see this cross member ahead of me with those holes. The bracket on the tank allows you to really mount it up in a lot of different spots, and a lot of times where you're tying into your metered and supplied air, there's going to be some bolts that will allow you to bolt this up. Main thing is it's going to be nice and solid. So I have ours mounted here. I then routed our line, and again trying to make sure that it's got no kinks. We have our 90-degree push connect fitting, and this is going to be the output. This goes back to the fitting, so just make sure that you're tying it into this push connect fitting, which has the other push connect on the same side, so it's the furthest one out. Now the metered air that's on the same side as our supply line to our towed vehicle, I plugged that in and ran it up to where we have our regulator, where our supplied and metered air comes from. So I just have this extra, and then I routed another length from our supply, and just kind of, again, making sure that these are tucked up. And what we're looking for is this manifold. We're going to have a supply line as well as our supply line is going to be this larger diameter, and then our metered air is down here. Now, if you need to test to determine if it's the right spot, your metered air is going to be the smaller diameter hose. Generally, it's going to be this green color. So if you look for that, what you can do is undo it from the push connect fitting by pushing that collar back and pulling this back, and then you should have air leaking out as you press the brakes. And if you want to, you can hold that down until all the air is dispersed from the fitting. If you do cut your supply line before bleeding out the metered, it's not a big deal. Just know that it's going to have air pressure that's going to come out pretty quickly. So don't be surprised when you cut that line if it starts gushing a ton of air. So we'll start with our metered air, and again, that's the smaller diameter one, and we're pretty much just putting a T into this. So what we need to do with our tubing cutter, I separated this just to make it a little bit easier. And these lines they're flexible, but it does get a little bit tricky sometimes to get this to all fit together. Now, something that I'll point out is ours has undercoating sprayed all on it, but if you have a bunch of road grime and debris, that can make it to where those air fittings aren't going to connect very well. So what I recommend doing is with a rag and some brake cleaner, just go ahead and clean at least the portions of where those push connects are going to go on That's going to really just give it the best chance to bite on and not have any air leaks. So just wipe that down. And I'm going to take my other piece that we cut here. I'll be shortening this because our T is going to go in, but I'm going to at least get one side nice and clean and get that set up so we can figure out exactly where we're going to want to cut. So now we're going to take this push connect fitting, and again, just make sure that you're really seating this properly. So it should give you a little bit of resistance, and then once you kind of push past that, should lock it in place. You can give it a quick tug, and then from here I can kind of determine exactly where I'm going to cut this. Feel free to leave a little extra. You don't want to cut it short because, again, there's not a whole lot of excess here to be able to move it around and get that to hook up. So cut this back here. And then we'll get this attached. And then we'll take our 1/4-inch airline tube that we ran again off of that metered side, and that's going to plug in here. I obviously have quite a bit of excess, so I'm going to cut some of that back. And you can route this however you want. You know, if you want to get fancy, the main thing is it's not going to kink the line or get caught on anything on the road. So this is a great way to protect it, and really I don't even have to cut anything here. So we'll push this in and then just double check, make sure everything's nice and seated there. And our supply line is tucked up a little bit above there. This is a 1/2-inch supply line, which does create a little bit of an issue, at least on Freightliner chassis. And the reason being is our supplied from the kit connector is this T, and this is set up for 5/8 airlines, which you're going to see on a lot of different coaches. So if that's the case, if yours is different and it's a large diameter green tube, that makes it nice and easy to be able to use this fitting. But for the Freightliners, that's not the case. We actually have this part here. We made this. There is a part number available though for you to pick this up if you have a Freightliner, and that just cuts that down to that 1/2 inch, so that way it's going to seat. So similar to what we did on this metered air, we're going to get our supply line, and it's tucked up here. And again, you don't have a ton of room, and these thicker diameter ones are not super flexible, so if you need to, you can cut some of the zip ties to give yourself a little bit of room. Just make sure you're not damaging any other lines in the process. And if you haven't bled out that line from your metered air, which at this point, if you've cut that, it's going to do that anyway by pushing your brakes. It's, again, don't be surprised if it does start to leak air out. So I'll just go ahead and make a nice clean cut. And there's our residual. I'll just go ahead and I'm going to clean up those ends there with that brake cleaner, and then I'll snip it back before getting our new push connect fitting T in place. Now I went ahead and made our connections. Just make sure that they're seated properly, and you can go ahead and zip tie those wires up. But before you just hook up to your towed vehicle, you are going to want to make sure that there's no leaks happening, and the best way to do that is start your RV, let the compressor build up, and then what you'll do is shut it off once it's reached its max PSI, and you can use a soapy water solution to spray down all of the connections. You can also audibly listen for them. But if you do have any of those leaks, you're going to want to try to reseat that. Now, you may have to bleed off that pressure again. You can just undo the the metered air to bleed that out. But yeah, just check all of them. Make sure that it's going to be nice and secure. So we got our air pressure up to operating pressure. And at this point, just soapy water, just douse all of those connections that you made. And if you start to see large bubbles forming, that's a good sign that you have an air leak. If it just kind of stays like that and you're not hearing things, generally is going to be your first step, then you should be okay. So just double check. You don't want to have a slow draw on your air pressure. With everything sprayed down, we don't have any leaks. So what we're going to do is get our towed vehicle hooked up with our air line, as well as the rest of our flat tow components, and we're going to test to make sure that the braking system's working. It's also a good time to plug in your wireless coach link, and that way you can see that monitoring as you're applying the brakes on your vehicle. So now that we have everything installed on both sides of the towed vehicle as well as the RV, we'll just make our connection with our coiled air cable. So just push this in, should snap into place. And then we need to check to make sure that the brakes are working. So you might want to do this with your wireless coach link. It's going to make sure that you know that they're applying, but we do want to check to path of the cable and make sure that everything's dialed in properly. So you might have someone hit the brakes on the RV while you watch the pedal on your towed vehicle. With our coach link plugged into that 12-volt power, just hit the brakes. We can see that it lights up. I'm going to hold it, and that way we can hear that the buzzer's working. There we are. And then we'll check the pedal on the towed vehicle. With the brakes working properly, we're happy with that. We'll just make sure we have the rest of our flat tow components set up. We'll get our vehicle in tow mode, and then we're ready to hit the road. And that was a look and installation of the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system on a 2023 Ford Bronco.